guys, this is Brandy, otherwise known as Mystery of Diamonds, and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, hey y'all. Okay, so we have another Forensic Friday. I have on my, what I am now calling crime scene nails. Looky at my crime scene nails. So I decided I was going to start using these for my Forensic Fridays, no matter what canvas I am working on, because they're all about crime scenes. Now, if you are new here and you don't know, the first thing that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be telling the answer to the last Forensic Fridays mystery. And so if you don't want to get a spoiler and you have not had an opportunity to watch that Forensic Friday, I'm going to put it up here in the eye. That way you can stop here, you can go and watch it so that you can hear what the mystery was and see if you are correct before I give you the answer to the mystery. Then what we'll do is I will knock stuff all around my desk. That's what'll happen. Sorry. I will then start diamond painting, and I will do a voiceover of the forensic case that we are going to be covering today. Okay, so are you guys ready for the answer to the last mystery? I hope so. From what I saw in the comments, a lot of people seemed to have gotten this correct. Okay, so it was called Double Suicide on Midland Ridge. If the crack between the Jeep door and the frame was covered by masking tape, then the victims were either already asphyxiated by carbon monoxide or at least unconscious when they were put in the Jeep. They could not have taped the door in this way if they had been inside. Jana, if she was the murderer, had unwittingly implicated herself with the note. Even if she's not guilty, she's obviously a suspect. So most of you guys figured out that, yes, in order for them to have been taped into the car, they could not have done that themselves while they were inside because it was taped on the door jamb. It's kind of funny because that's how our chaperones, they used to tape us into our rooms when we would go anywhere in the band. And so, like, there was no way to get out of the room and get back in and put that tape back on by ourselves. So this one kind of came to me. I was like, yep. And I'm glad a lot of people pretty much got this one down. So the canvas that I'm actually going to be working on, because it is Friday, and this Friday starts the Hanathon 2. So I am going to be working on the canvas that I chose, which is Alley Cat, which is a square. So I love it. I am so excited to be working on this one. Of course, you know, I would have to have all of my stuff not, you know, laid down like it's supposed to be. That, you know, that's about right for me. Okay, so let me get myself all situated. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I am going to start the forensic case right now. Okay, so hounded by the mysterious disappearance of her mother, a young woman set out on a personal quest for answers. 20 years after the initial investigation and some old bones, she found evidence of a deep, dark family secret, a hint of what really happened to her mother. Verona, Kentucky, population 500. The center of town features a four-way stop, a one-room city hall, and Mr. Herb's, a popular restaurant where the locals gather for its famous fried fish. In a town this size, word spread quickly when 25-year-old Marlene Major, the mother of 2 young children, was reported missing. Her husband, Bill, said she just got into her car and drove away. Sergeant Graham said that, you know, he talked to the father, and Bill had said that they got into an argument on Saturday evening, and she was mad at him, and that's why, you know, she was all upset. And he acted upset that, you know, she just left. He said he spent the whole night driving around looking for her and trying to figure out where she was. Bill and Marlene Major had been married for 9 years. They appeared to be a traditional couple, but their marriage wasn't the least bit conventional. Bill wasn't Marlene's only love interest. She was having an affair with Glenn St. Hilaire, a man who worked for Marlene's husband and lived in a trailer on their property. Graham said that when time went on, they asked Bill and they asked Glenn, like what was going on, and it became, they finally came out and they said, look, Glenn had started to become friends with Marlene, and eventually that friendship turned into a romance. And Bill not only knew about the affair, but he actually encouraged it. So he thought that the reason that Bill was using this infatuation or this relationship between Marlene and Glenn was that he wasn't actually interested in Marlene at all. And so this was a way to kind of have the marriage, but at the same time have someone else doing all that part with Marlene. And there were rumors that Bill also had a girlfriend on the side. When questioned by police, both her husband and Glenn denied any involvement in her disappearance, and so they didn't know where she went. Marlene's children, 8-year-old Donald and 4-year-old Lelana, were in bed when Marlene left. Oh, sorry, it's Lalana. And they heard nothing out of the ordinary. Marlene's car was missing too, but she left without taking any personal items. So Lalana said that her mom had gone to the doctor the week before. She'd gotten a prescription for an allergy. That allergy medicine was still at the house. All of her jewelry was still there. Her driver's license was there. Her social security. So she took literally nothing with her. Police found no evidence of a struggle either in Marlene's home or in Glenn's trailer. Lalana said it seemed like her mom just kind of dropped off the face of the earth. Graham said that, he just kind of figured, maybe it was a possibility that she had just kind of decided that she had had enough of whatever life was happening, and she just decided to get up and start all over. Bill told the children that their mother had abandoned them. Lalana said that her dad had basically told them that their mother was a drug addict, she was an alcoholic, she was a prostitute, she didn't care about them, and that she ran off with another man. And that's what she kind of thought had happened. I mean, because this is, you got to remember she was 4 years old. And so pretty much what her dad said, that's what she had to go based off of. Linda Smith, who is the prosecutor, said that they had Marlene's dental records and they faxed them all over the U.S. so that any time that there was a woman that had the approximate build and age of Marlene, anytime a woman like that was found, they used the dental records to compare them to see if it was Marlene. They probably did this about 25 times altogether during this time. But their efforts were fruitless. Eventually, Bill and his 2 children moved from Kentucky to Rhode Island, where his parents lived, and 1 year after Marlene's disappearance, Bill remarried. Glenn stayed in Verona and took a job at a local factory. For the next 20 years, no one heard from Marlene Major. Not her family, not her kids, no one. But something on her diary hinted at a deep, dark family secret that shed new light on a very cold case. Lalana and her brother grew up believing their mother abandoned them, making things worse. Their father became increasingly abusive. Lalana said that he actually beat her brother Donald so bad that there were times he couldn't even get up off the floor. They missed school a lot because there was a lot of bruising, and Dad didn't want everybody seeing all the bruising. Finally, when the children could take it no longer, they confided to their new stepmother that their father was sexually abusing both of them and had also threatened them. Lalana said that her father used to tell her that if she didn't do what he asked her to do, if she didn't cooperate, he would kill her brother Donald. And then he would turn around and he would tell Donald that if Donald didn't do exactly as he asked, if he didn't cooperate, he would kill his sister. So Bill's new wife called the police and had him arrested for first-degree sexual assault. Alana said that like when the police came to arrest him, her and her brother Donald, they like looked around the corner, and their father looked at them, and she said she was so scared because the look on his face was one that was, she was just like, oh man, please, they've got to keep him, because if they don't, we're dead. Like he's gonna kill us. Bill Major was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. 9-year-old Lalana and 13-year-old Donald moved back to Kentucky to live with their maternal grandmother. By now, Lalana was old enough to ask her grandmother about something that had always haunted her. So Lalana says she looked at her grandmother. They were outside of a department store, like in the parking lot. And so she just looked at her grandmother. She said, do you know where my mom is? Do you know what's happened to her? Her grandmother was like silent for like 10 seconds. She was just kind of like looking at her. And then finally she just said, honey, your mother's dead. She has been dead. And your father killed her. But Lalana's grandmother had no proof, only suspicion. So Lalana decided she was going to investigate her mother's disappearance on her own. She said that she watched a lot of different old murder investigation shows, documentaries, on court TV. She tried to watch anything that she could where she could learn information about how investigations go, how to be able to find information on missing people, and the like. When Lalana turned 20, she was given access to her mother's cold case file and her mother's diary. She found a clue. There was a notation that implied her mother knew what her father was doing to her brother. Now, this is the diary entry that her mother wrote. I went to get Donald up for school and caught Bill with him. He tried to hide what they were doing, but I knew what I saw. I guess I died inside. I told him not to touch me ever again. And if he ever touched Donald, I'd kill him. He wants me to help him, and I don't know what to do. Smith, who's the prosecutor, said that Marlene couldn't tell any of this to her family. She didn't know exactly who to tell to, so she just she recorded it in her diary. She might not have given like extreme explicit information, but enough that you knew what was happening. And Lalana also found evidence that her mother was considering her divorce. So back into the diary, Marlene had written, I have something on him. He'll sign the papers and won't open his mouth. If he does, I'd go to his mom. Just take my word for it. He won't. He'd die before he let his mom find out what I have on him. Did he murder someone? No. Worse. Let's put it this way. I could be the biggest, worst person that ever walked the streets of Verona, and no judge in the country would give him custody of my kids over me. Lalana said that he knew that if she left, if his mom left, or if her mom left, that she'd tell people, and then he would go to prison, and he didn't want to do that. So to find out more, Lalana interviewed everyone she could find who had known her mother. She says she got a notebook, she took notes, and every time that she contacted somebody, she wrote the date that she contacted them, the time, what the conversation was about. And everyone said the same thing, including Glenn, which was her mother's boyfriend. Glenn actually told her something that her father had said. He had said to Glenn that if she had ever tried to leave and take the kids, that he would kill her, and that he knew how to commit the perfect crime. Tim Carnahan, which is a detective, said that Bill had told people that in order to get rid of a body, he would cut off her head, knock her teeth out with the butt of the gun, and that was after he shot her in the head, and then he would remove her jaw, and he would cut her into little pieces and spread her throughout the state. That way nobody could identify her. And Lalana discovered something else. 1 year after her mother's disappearance, a hunter had found a human skull in a rural tract of land, just a mile from her home. The bone was too badly degraded for DNA analysis, and there were no teeth or jaw, so dental comparisons were impossible, too. But Leilani was convinced that it was her mother's skull. Sergeant Graham says, it's tough when you have a suspect, or when you have a body, or you have a death and you don't have a suspect, that's one thing. But to be able to say that that someone 100% killed them, but you don't have the evidence to back it up, or the body to back it up, you don't have the stuff to put them behind, it's a very helpless feeling. Almost 20 years later, Leilani searched the area herself, going so far as to dig in nearby sinkholes, but she also was unsuccessful. She said, I wanted to find something, anything that was more than what we had now. Maybe if I could just find the rest of her body. But at the same time, she was kind of scared to also, she wanted to find the rest of her mother's remains, but at the same time, she was terrified of finding the rest of her mother's remains. Despite her frustration, Leilani soon learned that new forensic testing might be available to identify the mysterious skull, which for the past 20 years had been kept in the medical examiner's office. Marlene Major's daughter strongly suspected that a skull found in 1981 was her mother's. Emily Craig, who's the forensic anthropologist, said there was no face, there was no jaw, it was just the top of the skull, and it had a distinct bullet hole right in the top of it. The medical examiner determined that the fatal bullet entered her face and came up through the tip of her skull. Determined that the fatal bullet entered her face and came up through the top of her skull. There are 3 types of weapons that could have caused an injury that size. One was a 9mm pistol, the same type of weapon that Bill Major carried. A forensic anthropologist concluded the skull was that of a Caucasian female, approximately 30 years old. Craig says that the female characterizations or characteristics on the skull were the fact that there was no distinct brow ridge. Most men have a very heavy, right where the brow line is, there's like a thickness there. And women generally tend to not have that brow ridge. And this skull did not have that brow ridge. And so that kind of gave it some feminine, made them believe it was a female's skull. And there was evidence that someone deliberately tried to prevent an identification. Craig said that at the base of the skull, where the jaw was inserted, there was a small cut marks where it appeared as if someone had deliberately tried to sever the ligaments that attached the jaw to the rest of the skull. But 20 years had passed since Marlene Major had disappeared, and during that time, scientists found a way to extract DNA from fossils that were tens of thousands of years old. It wasn't DNA from the cell's nucleus, but from the mitochondria that lived outside the nucleus, which are more plentiful and easier to analyze. But mitochondrial DNA is passed to children only from the mother, so it limits the amount of information. Marlene's relatives were willing to pay for this new DNA test themselves. At the time, it was almost $20,000. The prosecution, Smith said that one of the hardest things that she ever heard was that one of Marlene's sisters was willing to cash in all of her retirement just to pay for this DNA test. Officials in Kentucky eventually rethought their position and decided to pay for this new DNA test available through LabCorp in North Carolina. They took a tiny bone fragment, it was frozen in liquid nitrogen, and it was crushed into a fine powder and placed into a vial with DNA extraction buffer. The sample was then amplified, creating millions of copies of the DNA, so there was a sufficient amount to be tested. Technicians then used a computer to compare the mitochondrial DNA sequences of the skull to what was found in Leilani's saliva. Now, one of the things that I kind of want to talk about is we do things like being able to get DNA, extract DNA from strawberries. You have to have this buffer because this buffer is what's going to separate out the DNA and allow it to be analyzed and pulled out. And so that's one of the reasons why the bone had to be crushed and all that, so that they could basically break those cells and get to the mitochondria. And so, but the problem is that when you have like over 700 different bases, it's hard for a human eye to be able to line up all these bases. And so that's why they use a computer, so that they could kind of line up the DNA bases between the two samples, between the crushed skull sample and Leilana's saliva. Since mitochondrial DNA is passed maternally, Marlene and her two children would have the same would have the same mitochondrial DNA profile. When the DNA from the skull was compared to Leilana's DNA, it was an exact match. Leilana said, at that point she wanted to scream it from the rooftops and tell everybody, listen, my mom did not abandon me and my brother. My mom did not leave us. She was murdered. 20 years after Marlene's skull was found, science proved her identity. Her diaries had suggested motive, and her daughter was determined to bring her father to justice. Prosecutors believed that Marlene discovered the truth about her husband, that he was sexually abusing his own children. In her diary, she said she was considering a divorce and would use this information against him if he stood in her way. For this reason, and based on the forensic evidence, the prosecution concluded that her murder was premeditated. They believe that Bill killed her with his handgun, then dismembered her body and to remove all traces of any identification. They think that he buried her remains in several nearby sinkholes, disposed of the gun, and pushed her car into the Ohio River. And that way, he could say that she drove off. Tim Carnahan said that, it's kind of ironic. Back then, at the time that the murder was committed, he's thinking he's got like the perfect crime because, you take away the teeth. There's no dental identification. You dismember the jaw. So you can't eat, and you basically mess up the whole face. Like everything is messed up. So you can't do a reconstruction based off the skull. You can't do dental records, so he's figuring he's got it all under control. And, at the time, DNA analysis was not as far as it is now, and so, as time progressed and techniques became better, then they were able to take just a tiny little piece of that skull and be able to recover such an amazing amount of information. Bill's own father put the last piece of the puzzle in place. He said that Bill confessed to the murder during a conversation the two of them had 5 years earlier. Tim said that Bill's dad was like, this is horrible. This is not. He disowned his son. He even called and told the police about the conversation. Bill's father gave police this information at the time, but without any hard evidence, the information was useless. Linda Smith, the prosecutor, said that in Kentucky there's a rule that says that a defendant's statement is not enough. You have to have something to corroborate a defendant's statement. And so from 1996 to 2001, all they had was that statement. They didn't have any definitive evidence. So Bill's father, once again, offered to help in any way that he could. So Todd Kerner, who was a detective, said, well, would you mind helping us by coming up to Nova Scotia? Let us put a recorder on your phone, and then you contact your son in Massachusetts. And the father agreed. Bill's father, this is his part of the conversation. He says, I keep getting calls from Leilana, and she wants to know where her mother is so that she can get the bones and put them in a casket and have closure. Bill says, yeah, and put me in jail for life. Bill's dad said, you've pulled off the perfect crime, haven't you? Bill's like, no, I wouldn't call it perfect, because if the crime was perfect, nobody would ever know about it. Bill Major was arrested and charged with Marlene's murder. During extradition to Kentucky, he confessed to the local sheriff. Um, he literally said to him, he said, killing that girl meant nothing to me. It would be like me getting up every morning and tying my shoes. That's how much it meant to me. Leilani said, ultimately, my mom died to be able to try to protect me and my brother. Major admitted to pushing his wife's car into the Ohio River and burying her in sinkholes. They never did recover the car or the rest of her remains. But when they went to trial, it only took 43 minutes for the jury to find Bill guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. And this is one of those, I like this case because, like, something like I tell my students is that, just because at the time of a crime being committed, you might not have technological advances that can find certain evidence, but that doesn't mean that won't be found later, because science is always advancing. So that's something to consider. Okay, well, that's what I've gotten done so far on my alley cat. I'm enjoying it so far. Of course, I love Hannah Lynn. I love squares. I love Diamond Art Club. So, yay! Okay, so are we ready? First off, I hope that you enjoyed the forensic mystery, or the forensics case that we talked about. And I hope that you want to stick around for more. But now for the mystery for this time. Are y'all ready? All right. So here we go. The contents of the mansion of Everett Ashley Woodstock, the late Everett Ashley Woodstock, ran the gamut from the exquisite, the tasteful, and the rare to the worst in absolute schlock. Everett Ashley Woodstock had spent a lifetime obsessed with mythology. Not all mythologies, however, nor the meaning of mythology in history or in art or in literature, but simply a total and exclusive devotion to the stories, characters, and artifacts of Greek mythology. The combination of this passion and his considerable wealth meant that Woodstock's pieces of genuine Greek statuary, particularly those sculpted before 600 BC, were unmatched by all but a few major museums in the world. The same was true of his collection of Minoan pottery. In fact, there were some wags in the Department of Archaeology at the local university who were known to observe that the Minotaur, if he ever came back, would likely feel more at home in Woodstock Solarium than in Crete itself. But there was another side to the Woodstock experience. As though to counter the exquisite beauty with which he had surrounded himself, this eccentric old man had dipped into the vulgar and cheap with a passion that outdid his artistic sense. For every genuine piece of sculpture from the Mediterranean, there were 2, 3, or even 4 huge and ugly plaster of Paris statues of the Greek gods or the Greek heroes or the many virgin victims of Zeus. Each delicate vase was overwhelmed on all sides by a gargantuan Arachne, or a puffy Chloe, or an ample-bosomed but vicious Phaedra. Chief Inspector Lawrence Darby contemplated this contradiction as he stood in the foyer of the Woodstock mansion, trying to stay clear of the bustle of the homicide unit doing its job around him. The body of old Woodstock, so brutally murdered, had been cleared away and the coroner had left, but the blood, sticky now, still covered the floor, and the photographers and lab technicians continued to comb the place, searching, dusting, photographing. Chief Inspector Lawrence Darby knew they would be here for a long, long time if every piece had to be checked. In the foyer alone, there were 7 life-size statues, each representing a principal character in the gruesome story of the House of Atreus, and another set showing Jason and the Argonauts. Over in the archway knelt an ubiquitous Paris holding a huge golden apple. "Must have taken a few tons of plaster for that one," Darby said to the photographer, who had just taken a 3rd shot of Paris's bare bottom. The photographer looked up quickly. She was embarrassed. "I didn't see you, Chief. Kennedy said to get pictures of everything from every angle, so..." Did Kennedy tell you to get some shots of that broken display case over there? Lawrence Darby wanted to know. Someone, probably the killer, could not tell junk from class. That vase left behind in the case looks Minoan to me. Kennedy was Detective Bernard Kennedy, newly promoted, recently assigned, and perpetually, painfully eager. He was out in the solarium trying to begin an inventory of the Woodstock collection. The photographer was hustling off to shoot the display case when Detective Kennedy suddenly materialized beside a statue of Theseus that was painted amateurishly in a garish red. "You should see the stuff in there, Chief," he blurted as soon as he saw Lawrence Darby. Kennedy always seemed to talk extra loud around his boss. It made Darby feel just a little bit older than he was. "There are all kinds of broken cases." Detective Kennedy didn't slow down easily once he got excited. "And some of those big statues, I guess they were just too big for the killer to carry. You should see this one. Damocles." "Damocles," Darby corrected. "Oh, yeah, Damocles." There was no stopping Detective Kennedy. "He's got this giant sword over his head, hanging from the ceiling yet. And these two guys, Damien and Pythias." Darby managed to get in. "Yeah, Pythias," he smirked. "Wonder what those two guys had going." Darby felt weak. "They are a wonderful symbol of true friendship. Nothing more." Didn't look like that to me." Kennedy paused for a second to bring a large plastic bag out from behind Theseus. "Anyways," he continued, "we're going to have a lot more trouble tracking down all that pottery than fingering the killer. Here's the piece de resistance." Darby ignored the pronunciation. "I heard there was a message left by Woodstock. This is it?" "Yeah, we found it right beside him." Kennedy held up a sheet of newspaper. "See? Look it. Printed in his own blood. Venus. With his own finger, too. Must have." Darby looked away. He hated the sight of blood. Kennedy wasn't finished. "And here's your killer." He held out an engraved, ebony-handled writing crop. The initials TFW were very clear. "This is what we found behind the statue of Venus over there. There's blood on it, or I missed my guess. But it's the old man's, too. Anyway, TFW has got to be Terence Frederick Woodstock. That's the old man's nephew. Find him, and I'll bet it's case closed." Darby paused a moment or two to let his young subordinate wind down. "Detective Kennedy," he said, "I think you're looking at a frame-up. A clumsy one, too, I might add." "What do you mean?" Kennedy was ignorant. "It's plain as day. The old guy writes a message in his last few seconds, uses his own blood. He couldn't possibly—" "If I may." Darby raised his voice to Kennedy's decibel level for the first time. "You, young man, have an obvious gap in your classical education. Unless it's filled, you're probably going to arrest the wrong person." So what did Lawrence Darby note that Detective Kennedy seems to have missed? So that is our mystery for this time. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you enjoyed the forensic case. So make sure to comment down below what you think the answer to the mystery is. If you want to comment on what you thought about the case, that would be awesome too. So I hope that you've enjoyed this, and if you have, please hit that thumbs up button down below. And if you're new to my channel and you haven't subscribed, I would love for you to subscribe and become part of the Diamonds family. So just make sure though that you hit that bell icon for all notifications. That way you know anytime that I upload a video or anytime that I go live. And I normally go live on Mondays at 7 o'clock Central. I hope to see you guys there. All right, I'm going to leave you like I always do. Reach for the stars, grab hold on, and never let go. Until my next video, bye guys.